In 1965, a black auto worker with 30 years on the line could walk away at age 55 with a guaranteed pension, enough to cover rent, groceries, and still have money left over every single month. Union contracts forced companies to promise this security, shaping entire cities and fueling black middle-class dreams. But how did that system actually work, and why did it vanish, leaving most people today working into their 70s? The real story starts with a bargaining table and a contract clause that changed everything. In 1950, the United Auto Workers sat across from General Motors and demanded something no American union had ever secured on such a scale: a lifetime pension paid entirely by the company and locked into the contract itself. This became known as the Treaty of Detroit, a 5-year agreement that set a new standard for industrial America. The pension was not a vague promise or a company flyer. It was spelled out in binding legal text. The formula was simple: years of service multiplied by a fixed monthly rate, guaranteed for life. No payroll deductions, no worker contributions. GM alone was on the hook, responsible for funding the plan through a dedicated trust. That contract did not just offer a pension at age 65. Over the next decade, UAW negotiators pushed the boundaries. Strikes in 1950, 1964, and 1967 forced the big three automakers, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, to expand early retirement options. By the mid-1960s, contracts included the right to retire after 30 years on the line, often in your mid-50s, and still receive a full pension. These were not empty threats. At its peak, the UAW counted 1.5 million members, enough to shut down entire industries if their demands were not met. Pattern bargaining meant that once one company agreed, the others followed, and soon steel mills in Pittsburgh, Gary, and Cleveland were signing similar deals. The language in those contracts was unmistakable. Pensions would be calculated by a set formula, administered by joint labor management boards with strict fiduciary oversight. The company bore the investment risk, not the worker. Every year of service counted, and survivor benefits meant widows were not left behind. These were not handouts. They were enforceable promises, won through collective leverage and written into law. These were lifetime commitments backed by contract and oversight. For black workers who broke into these jobs, the contract was a shield against the insecurity that defined so much of American labor. The pension clause was the difference between working until you dropped and planning a future with true dignity. In cities across the industrial Midwest, the power of the union turned bargaining demands into lifelong guarantees. The next question was not whether the promise existed, but just how far that monthly check could stretch. A 30-year veteran of the Detroit auto line in 1965 could expect a pension check for $350 each month, money that arrived like clockwork, no matter what happened to the company's stock or the broader economy. For many, that meant retiring at 55 with a promise in writing and a future that could actually be planned. The numbers were not abstract. $350 in 1965 carried the same weight as about $3,200 today. But the story did not stop at the pension. Social Security added another $120, bringing monthly income to $470. For a retired couple, this was the difference between scraping by and having real choices. The household budget proved it. A modest apartment near the plant rented for $85. Groceries for two ran about $100. Utilities, gas, electric, water came to $30. Getting around town, whether by bus or a used Chevy, cost another $20. After the basics, $235, there was still $235 left over. That surplus was not a rounding error. It meant money in the bank, help for a child's tuition, or a trip to see family in the South. Rent alone took just 18% of total monthly income. Compare that to today, where housing easily swallows half of a retiree's Social Security check. Every line of the 1965 budget was shaped by union bargaining. Pension income covered the essentials with room to breathe. There were no premium payments for health insurance, no hidden deductibles. The monthly check paid for more than survival. It bought dignity, leisure, and the confidence to look ahead. These were not isolated cases. In union towns across the Midwest, retirees lived this reality. The numbers made it possible. $350 from the pension, $120 from Social Security, and a cost of living that left money on the table. That was the purchasing power of a contract enforced by workers themselves. Detroit's skyline once stood as a beacon for black families leaving the Jim Crow South, promising not just a job, but the possibility of a future. In the heart of the city, assembly lines ran day and night, drawing men and women from Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, anywhere a letter home could carry news of steady work and union protection. By the mid-1960s, Detroit's auto belt supported 150,000 union jobs. That number was not a statistic. It meant entire neighborhoods built around the shift change, schools filled with the children of plant workers, and church congregations packed with families living under the same clock. The promise of a pension and early retirement was not a rumor. It was written into the contracts that shaped daily life. Pittsburgh, too, pulsed with the rhythm of industry. Steel mills lined the rivers, their smokestacks marking the city's skyline. In the mills and foundries, about 70,000 workers, many of them black, punched in for shifts that could last 12 hours or more. The city's hills and valleys echoed with the clang of steel and the quiet certainty that a lifetime of hard work would bring not just a paycheck, but a guaranteed endpoint, a retirement with dignity, not desperation. The pattern repeated in Gary, Indiana, where the vast Gary Works plant anchored the local economy, and in Cleveland, where steel and auto factories offered union wages and the security of a pension. Chicago's South Side, Milwaukee's factory belt, these places became magnets for families chasing the promise of stability. Chain migration worked its own logic. A brother or cousin would write home describing a foreman willing to hire, a union card that meant protection, and a neighborhood where black families could buy homes close to the plant gates. Each new arrival was another link in a chain that stretched from southern towns to the industrial Midwest. These cities were not chosen at random. They offered more than just jobs. They offered a system. Union contracts did not just cover wages, they spelled out the path to retirement, with benefits guaranteed by law and enforced by collective action. For black workers, this was a break from the past, a chance to trade the uncertainty of sharecropping and domestic work for the predictability of a factory schedule and a pension formula. The concentration of jobs in these hubs was no accident. Employers needed labor, unions needed numbers, and black families needed opportunity. The result was a geographic map of security: Detroit's auto corridor, Pittsburgh's Steel Valley, Gary's towering mills, and the industrial sprawl of Chicago and Cleveland. Behind every job number was a family that weighed the risk of uprooting against the possibility of a better life. The decision to move north was rarely just about wages. It was about the promise that 30 years of hard labor could one day be exchanged for rest, for time with grandchildren, for a paid-off house and a check that came every month no matter what. In these cities, the American dream was shaped by the logic of union contracts and the collective strength of workers determined to claim their share of security. A pension check was not the only reason retirement at 55 felt secure in these union towns. The real difference came from everything bundled around that monthly payment, transforming it from a simple income stream into a full guarantee of dignity. In the 1960s, a retired auto worker in Detroit or a steel worker in Pittsburgh did not just get a check. He and his spouse received health insurance paid in full by the company. No monthly premiums, no deductibles. A trip to the doctor or a hospital stay did not threaten to drain savings or force impossible choices. Medical bills that could ruin a modern retiree were simply not part of the equation. These health benefits were not a side note, they were written directly into the union contracts. The same legal documents that spelled out the pension formula also promised comprehensive medical coverage for as long as the retiree lived. Before Medicare even existed, union contracts guaranteed hospital, surgical, and physician care, with some plans including dental and vision. Spouses were covered too. For many families, this meant a level of security that is almost unthinkable today. A chronic illness, a surgery, or even long-term care could be handled without a single out-of-pocket dollar. The cost was not shifted onto the retiree or their widow. Employers carried that obligation year after year. Survivor benefits added another layer of protection. If a retiree passed away, the pension did not simply vanish. Joint and survivor options, negotiated by the unions, allowed a spouse, most often a widow, to continue receiving a portion of the monthly benefit for life. The contract language was clear. Should a retiree die, his surviving spouse shall receive 50% of the monthly benefit for the remainder of her life. That clause was not just legalese, it was the difference between a widow staying in her home or face sudden poverty. In cities like Gary and Cleveland, generations of women relied on these survivor benefits to maintain their households after a husband's death, a promise enforced by the union and the courts. Cost of living adjustments, often called COLAs, rounded out the package. While not every plan had automatic annual increases, many included periodic raises to keep up with inflation. Some contracts tied pension increases to the consumer price index, others negotiated flat dollar bumps every few years. This meant a retiree's purchasing power did not quietly erode as prices crept up. A pension that started at $350 a month in 1965 could be worth $380 or $400 a decade later, thanks to COLA provisions hammered out at the bargaining table. For a family on a fixed income, those increases mattered a lot. They kept the lights on, food on the table, and dignity intact. Taken together, these benefits created a multiplier effect. The pension check covered the basics, but the health insurance, survivor clauses, and COLAs meant security lasted as long as the retiree and their spouse did. No fear of medical bankruptcy, no sudden drop to zero if a spouse died, no slow slide into poverty as costs rose. This was not just a paycheck, it was a system engineered for stability, written into law and enforced by the collective power of the union. For Black families who made it into these jobs, the full package was a shield against the insecurity that defined so much of American working life. It was comprehensive, it was enforceable, and it was the foundation for a retirement that meant more than just scraping by. In 1978, Congress quietly amended the tax code with a clause that would become the foundation of the 401k plan. At the time, few realized how this technical change would open the door for corporate boards to walk away from the pension guarantees that had defined mid-century retirement. Before long, benefits consultants and executives recognized the opportunity to shift the risk and responsibility for retirement savings from the company to the worker. This was not a slow erosion. It was a series of deliberate decisions, each one using new legal tools to unbind employers from their promises. Bankruptcy law became another lever. When Bethlehem Steel filed for bankruptcy in 2001, it was not just creditors who took a hit. 95,000 retirees saw their pensions handed over to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, PBGC. but PBGC payments came with caps. Many retirees lost a third or more of the income they had been promised. Health coverage vanished overnight. General Motors, once the gold standard, used bankruptcy in 2009 to freeze pension accruals for thousands and to cut retiree health benefits, all under court protection. Major corporations like IBM and Verizon did not wait for crisis. They simply froze their defined benefit plans and moved new hires onto 401k accounts, citing cost and volatility. The law allowed them to do it. The result was that what had been a binding, lifelong guarantee became a variable account, subject to market swings and personal luck. Every step along this chain was a choice, not an inevitability. It was a legal strategy executed in boardrooms and courtrooms, not a natural decline. The consequences would soon show up in the numbers as pensions shrank and the safety net frayed. Today, the numbers tell a different story. The average 401k balance for Americans nearing retirement, ages 55 to 64, sits at just $134,000. That may sound substantial, but the math is unforgiving. Applying the so-called safe withdrawal rule, 4% a year translates to barely $5,300 in annual income. That is about $440 a month before taxes. No cost of living adjustment, no guarantee the money will last as long as you do, and every market downturn chips away at what is left. Union membership, once the backbone of retirement security, has collapsed. In 1970, 31% of black workers belonged to a union, and by 2020, that figure had fallen to just 11%. The jobs that built the black middle class, auto, steel, manufacturing, have been replaced by contract work, temp agencies, and gig platforms offering no pension at all. The promise of a dignified exit after 30 years has been replaced by the reality of working well into your late 60s or 70s, hoping Social Security will be enough to keep the lights on. The racial wealth gap yawns wider than ever. For black families approaching retirement, the median savings is just $49,000. At a 4% withdrawal rate, that is less than $2,000 a year, barely enough to cover a single month's rent in most cities. These are not theoretical numbers. They are the lived reality for millions. The system that once turned 30 years of labor into security and surplus has been dismantled, replaced by a patchwork of individual risk and shrinking opportunity. When did working 30 years stop being enough? Today, nearly 2/3 of Americans have less than $10,000 saved for retirement, and the median black family retires with less than $50,000, barely enough to last a few years. What vanished wasn't just a benefit, but a promise. 30 years' work would guarantee dignity, not desperation. Until that promise returns, retirement remains a privilege, not a right. What would it take to make security the standard again? Let me know your thoughts below.